Welcome to your deep dive into Philippine political law. We've got a whole stack of fascinating court cases just for you. And these aren't just like, boring legal rulings. We're talking disputed elections, accusations of bribery, questionable spending. We even have a prison escape.
Wow.
It's like a legal thriller, but it's all real.
What's really cool here is that we're not just going to be exploring the what of these cases,
Right.
but also the why.
I like it.
We'll unpack the reasoning behind the Supreme Court decisions and what it means for you, for institutions, and for the Philippines as a whole.
Let's jump right in with the Maguindanao del Norte leadership shuffle.
Okay.
Remember when the province of Maguindanao was split into two new provinces?
Yes, back in 2021.
Back in 2021.
And it created quite a predicament.
Yeah.
Because the plebiscite to formally establish Maguindanao del Norte and Maguindanao del Sur happened after the 2022 election.
Oh, wow.
So the question was, who governs these new provinces?
Right.
In the meantime,
the
law was silent on this very specific situation.
Talk about a curveball. So how did the Supreme Court handle this?
Well, the court had to navigate some uncharted waters here.
Yeah.
They ultimately ruled that the elected vice governor of the original Maguindanao province would step in as acting governor of Maguindanao del Norte.
Okay.
And the next ranking member of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan, that's the provincial legislative body, would become the acting vice governor.
So essentially they looked at the existing hierarchy and said, next in line, please.
Exactly. But they made it clear that these were temporary positions.
Right.
Just to keep things running until new elections could be held.
So a clever workaround.
Yeah.
But it raises a question for me. Does this solution ensure a truly democratic transition?
Okay.
Or does it create the potential for acting officials to maybe unfairly benefit from those temporary positions?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And that's something to consider as we move through these cases.
Right.
Law isn't just about finding solutions. It's also about the potential consequences of those solutions.
I like it. Okay, let's move on to a case that involves a prison escape.
Okay.
A prison guard, PO2 Arthur Pineda, found himself in hot water when a murder suspect he was guarding escaped from a hospital.
This is where things get really fascinating.
Yeah.
Pineda was initially charged with conniving in the escape.
Okay.
Meaning he intentionally helped the prisoner get away.
Right.
But when you look at the details, it seems more like a case of negligence.
So what happened? Did he just, leave his post or something?
Not quite.
Okay.
While there certainly are protocols in place about guarding prisoners, in this case, the specific accusations against Pineda never mentioned negligence.
Interesting.
He was charged with conniving, which implies intent.
Right.
But the evidence suggested he may have simply failed to take proper precautions.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court stepped in because the charges didn't match the evidence.
Exactly. The Supreme Court emphasized the importance of what's called the information in Philippine legal proceedings.
Right.
It's the document that formally charges a person with a specific crime.
Yeah.
In Pineda's case, the information charged him with conniving, which is a much more serious offense than negligence.
So even though he might have made a mistake, he wasn't given a fair chance to defend himself against the specific accusation?
Precisely. The Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision.
Wow.
Stating that the charges were inaccurate from the get-go.
Interesting.
This reinforces that idea that you can't just, slap any charge on someone.
Right.
It has to be specific, and it has to align with the alleged actions.
It makes you wonder how often this kind of thing happens, right?
It does.
Where someone is charged with something that doesn't match the evidence.
That's a very valid question.
Yeah.
And it highlights how crucial it is for the judicial system to be precise and transparent.
Right.
Both for the accused and for the public trust in the system.
Totally agree.
As a whole.
Okay, let's move on to a case involving healthcare. PhilHealth versus Quezon City Eye Center.
Okay.
This one dives into the complexities of due process, especially for institutions.
This case arose from PhilHealth's investigation into some potentially shady patient recruitment practices for cataract operations.
Gotcha.
They were cracking down on doctors and hospitals who might be taking advantage of patients for profit.
Right.
And Quezon City Eye Center got caught in this crackdown.
So what happened?
They were slapped with fines and suspensions.
Okay.
But there was a major procedural misstep.
What was that?
The Eye Center was penalized without ever receiving a crucial document outlining the specific charges against them.
So they didn't even know what they were being accused of.
Yeah, they were essentially left in the dark about why they were being penalized.
Right.
So they took their case to the Supreme Court,
Okay.
arguing that their right to due process had been violated.
Did the Supreme Court agree?
They did.
Yeah.
The court emphasized that due process applies to everyone, including institutions like hospitals and businesses.
It's interesting.
It doesn't matter how big or small you are.
Right.
The government can't just punish you without following the rules.
So what does this mean for other organizations?
Right.
Could this decision make it harder for regulatory bodies like PhilHealth to hold institutions accountable?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it speaks to this ongoing balancing act between ensuring fairness and maintaining effective oversight.
Right.
The Supreme Court in this case was sending a message that due process cannot be sacrificed,
Yeah.
even in the pursuit of combating fraud or wrongdoing.
All right. Speaking of oversight, our next case puts us right in a power struggle
Oh,
at the very top of the Philippine government.
wow.
It's the ombudsman versus the special prosecutor, Dennis Villaignacio.
Okay.
It all started with a series of complaints against Villaignacio, alleging everything from skipping work to falsifying documents.
And the ombudsman took these accusations seriously
Right.
and launched an investigation.
Right.
Their internal affairs board found Villaignacio guilty of multiple offenses,
Yeah.
which ultimately led to his dismissal.
But he didn't go down without a fight.
No, he appealed,
Okay.
arguing that the ombudsman didn't actually have the authority to fire him
Mm-hmm.
and that the whole process was unfair.
Okay.
He claimed he wasn't given a proper chance to defend himself.
So we've got a two-pronged legal challenge here.
Yeah.
A power struggle over who has the final say.
Right.
And a due process question
Mm-hmm.
about whether the dismissal was handled properly.
Precisely.
Okay.
The Supreme Court had to consider both arguments carefully,
Right.
and they ultimately ruled in favor of the ombudsman on both counts.
Wow.
They confirmed that the ombudsman does in fact have the power to remove a special prosecutor,
Mm-hmm.
and they also found that Villaignacio was given every opportunity to defend himself,
Okay.
including submitting his own arguments and evidence.
So a double win for the ombudsman. But it raises a question, for me at least. Does this case set a precedent that strengthens the ombudsman's authority,
Okay.
making them too powerful?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And it highlights how legal decisions often have implications far beyond the case at hand.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant about the balance of power within government.
Okay. Are you ready to delve into the world of Philippine elections?
I am.
Our next case takes us to Isabela,
Okay.
where we've got some serious election shenanigans
Oh.
involving candidate substitutions and party affiliations.
This case demonstrates how even seemingly technical rules can have a huge impact on the outcome of an election.
Yeah.
It all started with a mayoral candidate,
Okay.
Estrella Navarro,
Mm-hmm.
switching to run for vice mayor at the last minute.
The joys of Philippine politics.
I know. Always full of surprises.
So what happened? Did they just find a random person to replace her?
They tried to.
Okay.
A man named Jujidi Agabao stepped up to be Navarro's substitute.
Hmm.
But then Comelec, that's the Commission on Elections, rejected his candidacy.
Why would they do that?
They didn't give a clear explanation at the time,
Okay.
which was part of the problem.
Right.
And to make matters even more confusing, they also declared Navarro an independent candidate,
Yet.
even though she was initially affiliated with the political party.
Wow. Okay.
So both Agabao and Navarro felt like Comelec was messing with their political aspirations.
Absolutely.
They argued they weren't given a fair chance to present their case
Right.
before these decisions were made.
Yeah.
A clear violation of their due process rights.
Did the Supreme Court have to step in and kind of play referee?
They did, and they sided with Agabao and Navarro.
Okay.
The court found that Comelec had acted improperly by not providing them with proper notice and a hearing before making these decisions.
So a win for due process.
Yes.
But did it actually change the outcome of the election?
Here's where things get a little bit tricky.
Okay.
By the time the case reached the Supreme Court, the election was over.
Right.
A new mayor was already in office.
So it was all for nothing, just a legal exercise.
Not quite.
Okay.
While the Supreme Court couldn't rewind the clock
Right.
and change the election results,
Yeah.
they used this case to send a strong message to Comelec,
What was that?
basically saying you need to get your act together
Yeah.
and ensure that candidates are treated fairly and given a chance to be heard.
So a victory for the principle of due process,
Yes.
even if it didn't directly benefit the individuals involved in this specific case.
Exactly. The court was highlighting the broader importance of procedural fairness,
Right.
especially in the context of elections, which are, the foundation of democratic society.
All right, let's move on to a case that's sure to satisfy your sweet tooth.
All right.
At least metaphorically.
Okay.
We're talking about taxes, specifically the taxation of raw sugar.
This case is less about sugar and more about
Okay.
a fascinating legal concept called mootness.
Mootness. All right, I'm intrigued.
It all started when the Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR, changed its rules regarding VAT, value-added tax,
Right.
on certain types of raw sugar.
So a new tax
Yeah.
that sugar producers probably didn't like.
You're right. A group of them, led by a man named Renato Munoz, filed a petition challenging this new tax regulation,
Okay.
claiming that it was unconstitutional and violated their rights.
So a classic legal battle over taxes.
Yes.
But why'd you say this case was about mootness?
Well, while the case was still ongoing,
Okay.
the BIR issued a new regulation that essentially reversed the previous one, restoring the tax-exempt status of raw sugar.
Talk about a sweet surprise.
I know, right?
So the issue that sparked the lawsuit essentially disappeared.
Exactly.
So mootness means the controversy or the dispute at the heart of a case
Yeah.
is no longer relevant.
Exactly. So you might think that the Supreme Court would just dismiss the case and move on.
That makes sense to me.
Right. Why waste time on a case that's essentially resolved? Well, they did ultimately dismiss the case.
Okay.
But they used this opportunity to clarify some important points about mootness.
Such as?
They emphasized that they can still rule on a moot case if it involves a grave constitutional violation,
Okay.
or if it presents an opportunity to provide guidance for future cases.
So even moot cases sometimes can serve a purpose.
Exactly. They also provided guidance for cases that are capable of repetition yet evading review.
Okay.
These are situations where the same legal issue might pop up again and again,
Right.
but always disappear before a court can rule on it.
Like a game of legal whack-a-mole.
Yeah, a very apt analogy.
Well, I like it.
And this kind of guidance is essential for ensuring that the legal system can address these recurring issues,
Right.
even when the specific facts of a case have become moot.
Okay, now get ready for a constitutional showdown. The Senate versus the president.
Wow.
This one takes us back to the height of the COVID-19 pandemic,
Yeah.
a time of immense uncertainty,
Yeah.
and unfortunately some questionable government spending.
This case highlights the crucial balance of power between different branches of government
Yeah.
and how the courts are sometimes called upon to be referees
Right.
in these disputes.
So the Senate wanted to investigate how COVID-19 funds were being spent,
Right, as part of their oversight function.
which makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
They need to hold the executive branch accountable.
Yes, but President Duterte wasn't too keen on this idea.
What did he do?
He barred executive department officials from testifying in the Senate hearings.
Oh, wow.
Essentially said, you can't question my people.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Yeah, quite a power play.
The Senate obviously cried foul,
They did.
saying that the president was obstructing their power of inquiry, which is, a fundamental aspect of their legislative role.
Yes,
So we've got a constitutional clash of the titans here,
we do.
and the Supreme Court was asked to step in and decide whether the president had overstepped his authority.
So who won? Did the court back the Senate or the president?
The court took a very cautious approach.
Okay. Recognizing the sensitivity of the situation,
Yeah.
they essentially said, hold your horses, everyone. There's no actual controversy here yet.
So they didn't want to jump into this political battle unless they absolutely had to.
Right.
Exactly.
They emphasized that the Senate hadn't exhausted all its own internal procedures for dealing with this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, a temporary truce in the power struggle.
Yes.
But it does raise a question for me. What happens if a similar situation arises again? Does the court's decision here set a precedent that weakens the Senate's oversight power?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that court rulings don't just resolve individual disputes.
Right.
They also shape the legal landscape for future cases.
Absolutely.
So the long-term implications of this case are still unfolding.
Okay, now let's meet Norman Cordero Marquez, an animal welfare advocate who decided to run for Senate.
All right, I like him already.
This case explores the line between legitimate candidacies and what are considered nuisance candidates.
So did Comelec try to block Marquez from running? They did.
Look,
They tried to declare him a nuisance candidate,
Right.
arguing that He didn't have enough nationwide recognition
Yeah.
and wasn't affiliated with any political party.
So essentially they were saying he wasn't a serious contender?
They were acting as gatekeepers,
Yeah.
trying to weed out candidates they didn't think were worthy.
Raises some concerns about fairness and access to the political process.
For sure.
But the Supreme Court stepped in and sided with Marquez,
Okay.
emphasizing that belonging to a political party is not a requirement to run for office in the Philippines.
A victory for independent candidates.
Yes.
But was it too late for Marquez? Had the election already happened by the time the court made its ruling?
Yes, the election was over.
Oh.
New senators had already been proclaimed.
So another win for the principal,
Yeah,
but unfortunately no impact on the actual election.
exactly. But it's worth noting that the court didn't just dismiss the case outright.
Right.
They used this opportunity to clarify the criteria for declaring someone a nuisance candidate, emphasizing that it shouldn't be used to stifle legitimate political aspirations or give an unfair advantage to established parties.
So a reminder that the court is always looking for opportunities to provide guidance and clarity,
Exactly.
even in cases that have become moot.
Precisely. And for you, it raises an interesting question.
Okay.
How do we balance the need to ensure serious contenders in elections with the right of any individual to participate in the democratic process?
Now let's talk about a case that highlights a frustrating reality in the Philippine legal system. Delays, delays, delays.
Oh,
It's the case of overpriced fertilizers and a very slow ombudsman.
okay.
Evelyn Monteros,
Mhm.
a city accountant, got caught up in a scandal
Right.
involving fertilizers purchased for a government program at way inflated prices.
This case underscores a fundamental right
All right.
that is often overlooked, the right to a speedy disposition of cases.
So the ombudsman was investigating Monteros, but it took them a ridiculously long time to make a decision.
Over 5 years, to be precise.
5 years.
Yes, and that's where the Supreme Court stepped in.
Okay.
They ruled that the ombudsman took far too long to resolve the case,
Right.
violating Montero's right to a speedy disposition, which is enshrined in the Constitution.
So a victory for Monteros.
Yes.
But it makes you wonder how often these kinds of delays occur.
Yeah.
And how many people are stuck in legal limbo waiting for their cases to be resolved?
That's a valid concern, and this case serves as a reminder that justice delayed can be justice denied.
Yeah.
These delays not only cause unnecessary stress and uncertainty for the accused, but they can also hinder their ability to mount an effective defense.
Right, because memories fade.
Exactly.
Evidence can be lost.
Exactly.
Witnesses disappear.
It's a reminder that the wheels of justice, while they should be thorough,
Right.
they should also be efficient.
I like it.
And this case raises an important question for you. What are the wider consequences of these delays for individuals and for the overall functioning of the justice system?
Now we've got another case of justice delayed.
Okay. And this one involves a mayoral candidate and allegations of exceeding campaign spending limits.
This case, Joseph Rolet Peñas versus Kamalek, reinforces the court's stance on the right to a speedy disposition of cases, particularly in the context of elections,
Right.
which, as we've seen, are time-sensitive events.
Absolutely.
So Peñas was accused of overspending during his campaign, but it sounds like the investigation dragged on for far too long,
6 years.
over 6 years.
That's crazy.
And once again, the Supreme Court had to step in and say enough is enough.
What did they do?
They ruled that this prolonged delay was unacceptable
Okay.
and that it violated Peñas' right to a speedy trial.
So another case dismissed due to this, sluggish pace of the legal process?
Yes, and the court made it clear that these delays erode public trust in the system
Right.
and can discourage people from participating in politics.
I believe.
After all, who wants to run for office if they know it might take years to clear their name
Yeah.
from unfounded accusations? It makes you wonder if these delays are intentional sometimes,
Right.
as a way to kind of stall or obstruct the legal process.
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
And it raises questions about the integrity and efficiency of the institutions involved.
All right, our next case is a cautionary tale about the importance of choosing the right lawyer.
Okay.
We've got a couple, the Floreses,
Mm-hmm.
who found themselves on the losing end of a lawsuit
Right.
due to some shady legal representation.
This case, spouses Marcelo and Madeline Flores versus spouses Leopoldo and Enriqueta Estriado.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know.
Shows that even when the facts of a case are straightforward,
Yeah,
The quality of legal representation can make all the difference.
it really can.
So the Floreses were involved in a dispute over a loan,
Mm-hmm.
but it sounds like their lawyer wasn't exactly a legal eagle.
To put it mildly,
What happened?
their lawyer, B. Tabalenko's, had actually been disbarred,
Disbar.
meaning he was no longer allowed to practice law. And to make matters worse, they'd previously dealt with another lawyer,
Oh no.
Socrates Rivera, who was later found to be suspended from practice.
So they were victims of not one, but two shady lawyers.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's terrible. So how can ordinary people who aren't familiar with all the intricacies of the legal profession protect themselves from this kind of fraudulent representation?
That's why the Supreme Court's decision in this case is so crucial.
Okay.
They annulled the original judgment against the Floreses,
Wow.
emphasizing that everyone deserves a fair hearing,
Right.
even if their lawyers are incompetent or dishonest.
So the court recognized that sometimes the legal system itself needs to protect people from bad lawyers.
Exactly.
Interesting.
The court also highlighted the need for greater transparency and accountability within the legal profession itself
Yeah.
to prevent these kinds of situations from happening in the first place.
Now, let's explore a case that dives into a unique aspect of the Philippine political system, the party list system, which is designed to ensure representation for marginalized and underrepresented groups in Congress.
This case, Angkla, Ang Partido ng mga Meronong Pilipino versus Comelec,
Okay.
examines how seats are allocated under this system and whether the current formula is truly fair.
So we're talking about the Baynat formula,
Yes.
the method used to determine how many seats each party list group gets in Congress.
Right. And this formula has been the subject of much debate and legal challenges.
Okay.
Several groups argue that the Baynat formula is unfair
Yeah.
because it doesn't always accurately reflect the percentage of votes each party list group receives.
So they were claiming that the system is rigged in favor of certain groups.
Essentially,
Got
they
it.
argue that it violates the principle of one person, one vote,
Right.
which is a cornerstone of democratic elections.
Did the Supreme Court agree with them?
They didn't. They upheld the Baynat formula,
Yeah.
emphasizing that the party list system is designed to achieve proportional representation.
Gotcha.
It's meant to ensure that a variety of voices, especially those from marginalized groups, are represented in Congress.
So while it might not be a perfect system, it's designed to address a specific need within the Philippine political landscape.
Exactly. And this case highlights how legal challenges often involve navigating complex political and social considerations,
Yeah.
not just interpreting the letter of the law.
Okay, ready for this next one?
I am.
This next case involves watercolors,
Okay.
specifically a popular brand that found itself in hot water, pun intended, over concerns about lead content.
This case, Venus Commercial Co. versus Department of Health,
Okay.
delves into the government's authority to regulate products to protect public health,
Right.
even when those actions might seem intrusive.
So someone raised the alarm about high lead levels, and the FDA took action.
Yes, they inspected Venus Commercial Co., the manufacturer,
Okay.
and seized some of their products without a warrant.
Hold on, isn't that a violation of the constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures?
That's precisely the argument that Venus Commercial Co.
Okay.
They challenged the FDA's actions,
Yeah.
claiming that their rights had been violated.
So a classic battle between individual rights and the government's power to protect the public good.
Exactly.
How did the Supreme Court rule?
They sided with the FDA.
Really?
Yeah, emphasizing that protecting public health is paramount.
Okay.
They acknowledged that warrants are generally required for
Mm.
searches and seizures,
Right.
but said that there are exceptions when it comes to protecting public safety.
So sometimes individual rights have to take a backseat to the greater good.
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
The court recognized the importance of both individual rights
Yeah.
and public health.
Right.
But in this case, they found that the potential harm to the public from lead exposure outweighed the company's right to privacy.
This case makes you wonder, though, where do we draw the line? How much power should the government have to inspect and seize products without a warrant, even in the name of public safety?
That's a crucial question that continues to be debated,
Yeah.
and it highlights this ongoing tension
Yeah.
between individual liberties and government power.
Okay, let's head to Abra for a case that involves an electric cooperative,
Right.
allegations of corruption,
Oh.
and a question about due process.
This case, GM Laredo P. Sears versus the National Electrification Administration Board, or NEAB, demonstrates how even when someone is found guilty of wrongdoing, procedural fairness still matters.
So Laredo Sears was the general manager of the Abra Electric Cooperative.
Yes.
And he was removed from his position after an audit
Right.
revealed some shady financial dealings.
The NEAB, which oversees electric cooperatives,
Right.
found Sears guilty of several offenses, including delayed remittances, questionable loans, and improper procurement procedures.
Okay.
Seemed like a pretty clear-cut case of mismanagement.
But he claimed that he was just following orders.
He did. He argued that he was simply following directives from the cooperatives board
Right.
and that NEAB had overstepped their authority
Okay.
by removing him.
So the Supreme Court had to decide
They did.
whether NEAB was right to fire him.
And they disagreed with Sears.
Okay.
They ruled that NEAB did, in fact, have the power to remove him.
So a loss for Sears.
Not entirely.
Wait, so even though he was found guilty, there were still procedural problems.
Exactly. The court said that NEAB, while they were right to remove Sears, failed to properly connect their findings to the specific charges against him.
Oh.
He was essentially left groping in the dark when it came to defending himself.
So even in cases of clear wrongdoing, the process still matters.
Absolutely.
The court was sending a message that accountability and fairness must go hand in hand.
Yes.
Even those accused of corruption have the right to a fair and transparent process.
Exactly.
Now, for a case that highlights the frustration of dealing with government bureaucracy.
Okay. We've got a story of delays, inaction,
Right.
and a bureaucratic tangle.
Oh.
The cost, POM, the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation, time and money.
This case underscores the constitutional right to a speedy resolution of cases, not just in courtrooms,
Right.
but also within administrative agencies.
So POM was tasked with privatizing power assets, and they needed to hire legal advisors to help with this complex process.
Right.
But they ran into a bureaucratic roadblock.
Yeah. Yeah, PO needed COA's approval before they could hire these advisors.
Okay.
They submitted their request, and then silence.
So they were stuck in limbo just waiting for an answer.
After over 100 days of radio silence,
Oh, wow.
ELM decided to go ahead and hire the advisors, figuring that inaction was as good as approval.
Okay.
But that turned out to be a costly mistake.
What happened? Did COA, suddenly wake up?
3 years later,
3 years.
COA finally emerged from their bureaucratic slumber and denied the request.
Claiming Psalm had violated procedures by hiring the advisors without their explicit approval.
Talk about add an insult to injury. So PSALM took COA to court.
They did.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court sided with PSAL, saying that their right to a speedy resolution had been violated.
Yeah.
The court called out COA for their inaction, highlighting that bureaucratic delays can have real consequences for individuals and institutions.
So a win for PSAL.
Yes.
But it makes you wonder how often this kind of thing happens, right?
It does.
How many requests and applications are just languishing in government offices?
It's a reminder that efficiency and responsiveness are essential for a function in government.
Okay, let's head to Baton,
Okay.
where the purchase of a patrol boat turned into a legal battle.
This case demonstrates that corruption can really lurk even in the most mundane government transactions.
A patrol boat.
Yes.
All right, I'm intrigued. What happened?
The Baton provincial government wanted to acquire a new patrol boat,
Yeah, okay.
and they followed the standard bidding process to find a supplier. But things took a suspicious turn after the winning bidder, Ernesto Assistant Jr., delivered the boat.
Okay.
It turned out he had provided a different engine than what was specified in the original procurement document.
Uh-oh. Was it like a cheaper engine?
And to make matters worse, someone had tampered with the documents after the delivery
Really?
to try to cover up this discrepancy.
Oh, wow.
The ombudsman launched an investigation,
Yeah.
and it turned out that several officials,
Yeah.
including members of the Bids and Awards Committee, were involved in this scheme.
So it wasn't just a simple mistake?
Yeah.
They intentionally tried to, circumvent the rules?
The court found them guilty of grave misconduct and dishonesty, emphasizing that public officials have a duty to uphold transparency and fairness in procurement processes.
Right.
Their actions eroded public trust and really undermined the integrity of the system.
It's a reminder that corruption can happen at all levels.
It can.
Even in a seemingly straightforward purchase,
Right.
like a patrol boat. Makes you wonder what else might be clipping through the cracks.
And it highlights the crucial role of oversight mechanisms, like the ombudsman,
Right.
in holding officials accountable.
All right, now let's talk about a case that exposes the dark side of an agency that's supposed to be fighting corruption. The Office of the Ombudsman itself.
Wow, okay.
This one might make you question, who watches the watchmen?
That's a good question.
This case involves Humphrey Monteroso,
Okay.
the deputy ombudsman for Mindanao.
Hmm.
He was accused of various misconduct, including delaying a land title tampering case for 2 years.
Imagine that. The person responsible for investigating corruption is accused of being corrupt themselves.
What happened? Did the ombudsman investigate their own?
They did. The Ombudsman's Internal Affairs Board took these allegations seriously.
Yeah.
They conducted a very thorough investigation,
Okay.
and they found Monteroso guilty of simple neglect of duty and conduct prejudicial to the best interests of the service.
So they held their own accountable.
They did, and they imposed a pretty significant penalty, a fine equivalent to 6 months of his salary.
Whoa.
But the story doesn't end there.
What else happened?
It turned out that Monteroso had also been using his position for personal gain.
Oh, no. What did he do?
He had been employing his houseboy as a personal aide using government funds.
So double trouble for the deputy ombudsman.
The court deemed his actions a clear breach of public trust and a clear violation of his duty to uphold the law.
It makes you think. If the people who are supposed to be fighting corruption are corrupt themselves, what hope is there for justice?
It's a sobering reminder that no one is above the law, and that even institutions tasked with upholding justice
Right.
need to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
And for you, it raises a crucial question. What mechanisms can we put in place to ensure that those in positions of power are truly serving the public interest?
Okay, let's move on to a case that delves into the complex world of land reform in the Philippines.
Right.
We've got the Land Bank of the Philippines facing off against a landowner, Corazon Villegas, over the value of a property acquired under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or CRP.
This case illustrates the challenges of balancing the rights of landowners
Right.
with the government's efforts to redistribute land to landless farmers.
So Villegas owned land that the government wanted to acquire for ARP, but they couldn't agree on a price.
Exactly.
Okay.
Villegas voluntarily offered a portion of her land
Okay.
for the program,
Right.
but she rejected the initial valuation of around P580,000 offered by the Department of Agrarian Reform, or TAIR, and the Land Bank.
So she thought it was worth a lot more.
How did the Supreme Court handle this valuation dispute?
Yeah, how'd they decide on a price?
They took a very methodical approach,
Okay.
diving deep into different valuation methods,
Okay.
considering factors like a property's potential income,
Right.
comparable sales in the area, market values based on tax declarations.
So they really wanted to get it right.
Yes, they were determined to be thorough. They ultimately adjusted the compensation amount to a little over P1 million.
Wow. Okay.
But they didn't stop there.
Okay.
The court also addressed another critical aspect of just compensation,
Which is?
the issue of delayed payment.
That-
Sometimes the government might agree to pay a certain amount,
Right.
but then it takes forever for that money to actually reach the landowner.
That can be a real problem.
It can have a real impact on people's lives and their livelihoods.
That's for sure.
So the court, in a move that I think underscores their commitment to fairness,
Yeah.
ordered the land bank to pay legal interest on the unpaid balance, calculated from the date the land was acquired,
Okay.
until full payment was made.
So they ensured a fair price, and they penalized the land bank for taking so long.
Exactly.
That's great.
It sends a message that justice delayed is justice denied,
Yes.
even in cases involving land reform.
This case also raises a question for me. How do we balance the need for swift action in implementing social programs with the right of individuals to fair and timely compensation?
It's a tough question.
Okay, let's move on to a case that will make you wonder if sometimes the crime depends on who's doing the defining.
Oh, no.
We've got a government aide,
Okay.
Silverio Remolano,
Hmm.
accused of shaking down a police officer for money.
This case highlights the importance of clear and accurate charges in criminal proceedings.
Right.
Remolano.
Mm-hmm.
And another aide, Tamer, were accused of extorting P200 from a police officer, SPO1 Nomer Cardines.
P200, that's not a lot of money.
I know, it might seem like a small amount.
Yeah.
But the principle at stake is significant.
Right.
They were initially charged with robbery,
Okay.
but the evidence presented at trial suggested a slightly different story.
Okay, so maybe it wasn't a straightforward robbery.
Right. While the initial charge was robbery, the evidence pointed more towards bribery,
So, like, the police officer might have given the money voluntarily.
in exchange for some favor or leniency.
So the same set of facts, but two very different interpretations of what happened.
Exactly.
How did the courts deal with this?
The lower courts convicted Remolano of robbery,
Okay.
but the Court of Appeals, looking at the same evidence, decided to modify the conviction to direct bribery.
Hold on, so they changed the charge based on the same evidence?
Yes, and this is where Remolano's right to due process comes in.
Okay.
He appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that change of the charges violated his right to be informed of the specific accusation against him.
That makes sense. Like, he was preparing a defense against robbery,
Right.
not bribery.
Yeah.
How can you defend yourself if you don't know what you're accused of?
The Supreme Court agreed with Remolano.
Okay.
They emphasized that defendants need to know precisely what they are accused of in order to build a proper defense.
So due process isn't just a technicality.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental protection.
It's a fundamental protection that ensures fairness and prevents those arbitrary actions by the government.
Okay, now are you ready for round 2 of the battle over CRRP compensation? We've got another case involving Land Bank and a landowner disputing the value of land acquired for agrarian reform.
This case, Land Bank of the Philippines versus Milagros de Jesus Macraig,
Okay.
demonstrates just how complex and contentious the process of determining just compensation can be,
Yeah.
even when both parties agree on the principle.
So another landowner who felt like she was being lowballed by the government.
Milagros de Jesus Macraig had a portion of her land acquired under KARB, but she rejected the initial valuation of around P472,000 offered by DR and Land Bank.
Okay.
She believed, just like Corazon Villegas in our previous case, that her land was worth more.
So back to court they went, arguing over spreadsheets and valuation formulas.
This case highlights how technical these disputes can get.
Yeah.
Court of Appeals, relying on certain data, arrived at a valuation of around P1.2 million.
Okay.
But the Supreme Court, scrutinizing the numbers, found flaws in their calculations.
So the Supreme Court had to like double check the math.
They did. They had to put on their accounting hats.
They considered factors like annual gross production, sell-in prices for comparable land.
Yes.
They even looked at witness testimonies to make sure the figures are accurate.
They did.
And they came up with a different number.
They adjusted the valuation to a little over P777,000.
Okay, but did they address the delayed payment issue like in the previous case?
You know it.
Yeah.
The court once again imposed legal interest on the unpaid compensation,
Okay.
underscoring that delaying payment to a landowner is not only unfair, but also a violation of their property rights.
So another victory for fairness.
Yes.
And a reminder that just compensation isn't just about the amount, but it's also about timely payment.
Exactly.
I like it.
This case also prompts a question for you. How can we make the process of land acquisition smoother and more transparent,
Right.
minimizing disputes and ensuring that landowners receive fair and prompt compensation?
Let's shift gears now to a case that'll make you wonder if professional organizations are as organized as they claim to be.
Okay.
We've got the Philippine Society of Mechanical Engineers, or PSME, embroiled in an election fiasco,
Oh, no.
with the Professional Regulation Commission, or PRC, caught in the middle.
This case highlights the complexities of jurisdiction
Right.
and the legal concept of mootness.
Okay.
And it all started with a seemingly simple election for PSME's national president in 2016.
But of course, in the world of Philippine law, nothing is ever simple, is it?
You're right. The election was plagued with protests,
Yeah.
accusations of irregularities,
What?
and ultimately resulted in 2 competing presidents,
Oh, wow.
each claiming to be the legitimate leader of the PSME.
Talk about an organizational headache. So how did the PRC get involved?
Well, the PRC, which regulates professionals in the Philippines,
Right.
recognized one of the disputed presidents,
Okay.
Leandro Conti.
So they picked a side.
They did.
Okay. I bet that didn't sit well with the other guy.
You're right. The other PSME president,
Yeah.
Murray Demdam,
Mm-hmm.
filed a petition challenging the PRC's recognition of Conti.
Okay.
But here's where the concept of mootness comes into play. While this petition was pending,
Mm-hmm.
a separate court case declared Conti's election invalid.
So the very person they had recognized was no longer the president.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Which meant that the PRC's recognition of Conti became irrelevant.
So the whole case just became pointless.
Essentially,
Wow.
the Supreme Court dismissed the petition, challenging PRC's actions,
Um,
saying that the issue had become moot.
So it wasn't about whether the PRC was right or wrong. It was
Yeah.
just because the circumstances changed.
Exactly. But the court didn't just dismiss the case outright.
Go.
They used this opportunity to emphasize the importance of respecting the jurisdiction of different courts and agencies.
So the Philippine legal system's like a complex web of overlap in jurisdictions.
And for you, it raises a question. How do we ensure that different branches of government and various agencies work together seamlessly,
Right.
avoiding conflicts,
Yeah.
ensuring the decisions are made efficiently and fairly?
All right, let's talk about a case that shows how a change in circumstances can make a case moot. Okay?
Even when there are significant legal issues at stake.
All right.
It's the New World International Development Hotel
Okay.
versus a union representing its workers.
This case, New World International Development versus Hotel Employee Union,
Okay.
illustrates how a change in circumstances can render a case moot,
Right.
even when significant legal issues are at stake.
So we've got a hotel accused of unfair labor practices, but then the union disappears.
Yes. While the case was ongoing, the union dissolved.
What happened? Did they, like, disband or something?
The hotel seized this opportunity
Okay.
and argued that the case had become moot because there was no longer a real party in interest.
So without the union, there was no one to represent the workers.
Exactly.
Did the Supreme Court agree with the hotel?
They did. They dismissed the case,
Okay.
emphasizing that without a real party in interest,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one to benefit from a court ruling.
It's a reminder that legal battles are often intertwined with real-world events.
They are. And sometimes those events can dramatically alter the course of a case.
Yeah.
What happened to the workers' claims then?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It raises the question of how do we ensure that procedural rules, like this requirement for a real party in interest,
Right.
don't inadvertently deny justice to those who have legitimate grievances.
Okay, now let's meet Vicente Campa,
Okay.
a bank executive who found himself at the center of a legal battle that dragged on for over a decade.
Wow.
This case, Vicente Campa versus Eugene Paras,
Okay.
raises questions about the right to a speedy trial
Mm-hmm.
and the consequences of government delays.
So Campa and another executive, Pasqua,
Okay.
were accused of issuing bad checks,
Okay.
engaging in some questionable financial dealings while running a bank.
Sounds like a classic case of white-collar crime.
Yes.
You mentioned a delay. How long did this case drag on?
The Banco Central ng Pilipinas, or BSP, filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, or DOJ, in 2007.
Okay.
But it took over 10 years for the DOJ to find probable cause
10 years.
and file charges against Campa and Pasqua.
Wow.
So 10 years, that's longer than some people spend in college.
Did they just go on with their lives while waiting for this to happen?
They argued, understandably,
Right.
that this delay violated their right to a speedy disposition of their case.
So did the Supreme Court come to their rescue?
The court acknowledged the significance of the delay,
Okay.
but ultimately ruled against Campa and Pasqua.
Wow.
They applied a balancing test,
Okay.
considering the complexity of the case, whether the defendants contributed to the delay,
Right.
and whether they suffered any prejudice as a result of the wait.
So even a 10-year delay wasn't enough to dismiss the case.
It demonstrates the complexities of the right to a speedy trial.
Right.
While it is a fundamental right,
Mm.
it's not always a clear-cut issue.
It makes you wonder how we define speedy in the context of legal proceedings.
Yeah.
What's an acceptable delay? And when does it become a violation of someone's rights?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's a reminder that legal principles often need to be applied with nuance, taking into account the specific circumstances of each case.
Now let's head to the municipality of St. Barbara in Iloilo,
Okay?
where a routine infrastructure project sparked a legal controversy over bidding procedures.
This case, Noel Jaspy versus Public Assistance and Corruption Prevention Office,
Wow. Another mouthful.
reminds us that even small-town projects can become entangled in complex legal battles.
So what went wrong here?
Noel Jaspy, the municipal engineer and vice chairman of the Bids and Awards Committee, or BAC,
Okay.
found himself in trouble over how a bidding process was handled.
What happened?
The municipality wanted to award contracts for 5 different infrastructure projects.
Okay.
Initially, 3 bidders expressed interest,
Okay.
but then one bidder withdrew completely, and the other 2 indicated that they wouldn't bid on certain projects
Okay.
due to budget constraints.
So they were still interested in some of the projects, but not all of them?
Yes.
Is that allowed?
That's where the controversy arose.
Okay.
Jaspy, along with other BAC members,
Yeah.
decided to proceed with the bidding. Despite these partial withdrawals,
Okay.
one of the BAC members raised concerns that this might violate procurement laws.
Oh, so they were worried about collusion. Like maybe the bidders had a prearranged deal?
Exactly.
Did the ombudsman get involved?
They did. A complaint was filed,
Okay.
and COA conducted a special audit.
Right.
The Ombudsman and the Court of Appeals initially found Jaspy and the other BAC members guilty of Gray's misconduct.
So it seemed like they had really messed up the bidding process.
But the Supreme Court took a closer look at Republic Act No. 9184.
Okay.
That's the law governing government procurement,
Yeah.
and came to a different conclusion.
What was that?
They dismissed the grave misconduct charges,
Okay.
stating that the bidder's actions didn't actually constitute a formal withdrawal of bids.
So they were technically still in the running.
As defined by the law, yes.
So a victory for Jaspy.
Yes, but it raises a question for you. If the law allows for this kind of partial bidding, could it create opportunities for collusion and manipulation,
It could.
undermining fair competition?
It definitely highlights the need for, like, constant scrutiny of these processes.
Yes, to ensure transparency and prevent abuse.
Okay, our next case involves a scholarship program, good intentions,
That's okay.
and the strict rules surrounding the use of government funds.
This case, Gladys Minerva Bilibly versus COA,
Mm-hmm.
centers on the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP.
So the NCIP wanted to, like, improve their services?
Yes, they wanted to enhance the skills and knowledge of their officials and employees
Okay.
so they could better serve Indigenous communities.
That sounds like a worthy goal.
It does.
What did they do?
They created a scholarship program at the Ateneo de Manila University,
Okay.
which is a pretty prestigious institution.
But there was a problem, right?
There was a problem.
Okay, what was it?
They used funds that were originally allocated for something else, a practice known as augmentation, which is a big no-no when it comes to government accounting.
So COA wasn't happy about this.
They weren't. COA flagged the spending as unauthorized
Mm-hmm.
and issued a notice of disallowance.
So were the NCIP officials in trouble?
They were held liable for the disallowed amount.
Okay.
But then the case took an unexpected turn.
Okay, what happened?
The Supreme Court, while agreeing with COA
Okay.
that the spending was unauthorized,
Yeah.
excused the NCIP officials from returning the money.
Wait, so they broke the rules but didn't face any consequences?
This is where the concept of social justice comes into play.
Okay.
The court acknowledged the procedural violation,
Yeah?
but recognized the scholarship program's intention to benefit Indigenous communities.
Right.
They also considered the potential harm of requiring the officials to return the money, which could have undermined the program
Right.
and ultimately hurt the very people it was designed to help.
It's a tough situation. You've got rules in place. But sometimes blindly following those rules can have negative consequences.
Exactly.
It seems like the court tried to find a balance
They did.
between upholding the law and considering the context.
This case highlights the complexities of legal decision-making,
Yeah.
and for you, it prompts a question.
Okay.
When, if ever, can good intentions justify deviations from established rules and regulations?
Okay, let's talk about Irene Rosario,
Okay.
who found herself caught in a bureaucratic nightmare
Oh, no.
that dragged on for over a decade.
This case, Irene Rosario versus COA, is a stark reminder that justice delayed can indeed be justice denied.
What happened?
It all started with an office renovation project
Okay.
at the Employees Compensation Commission,
Okay.
or ECC,
Mm-hmm.
back in 2006.
Great.
Rosario, a BAC member, was involved in procuring modular workstations.
Office furniture. That doesn't sound very scandalous.
No, it doesn't, but COA,
Right.
always vigilant about procurement procedures,
Of course.
decided to disallow payment for these workstations,
Oh.
claiming the ECC had violated procurement laws.
Oh, wow.
Initially, Rosario and the other BAC members were exonerated
Okay.
by COA's legal department.
So case closed, right?
Not so fast.
Oh, no. What happened?
COA's central office reversed that decision
Okay.
and reinstated their liability.
So they were back on the hook.
But here's where the real problem began.
What was that?
It took 6 years for COA to inform Rosario that her liability had been reinstated.
6 years.
Can you imagine the anxiety of being left in the dark for that long?
And then it gets worse.
It gets worse.
Okay, I'm listening.
Even after she became aware of the reinstated liability,
Yeah.
it took another 8 years for COA to issue a final decision.
14 years in total.
14 years.
That's unbelievable.
The Supreme Court found this delay to be outrageous.
I can't blame them.
They ruled that COA violated Rosario's right to a speedy resolution of her case,
Yeah.
causing her undue stress and uncertainty.
Makes you wonder what could have been done to prevent that kind of delay.
Right. This case underscores the need for clear timelines,
Right.
accountability mechanisms
Yeah.
within government agencies
Yeah.
to prevent this bureaucratic inertia.
And ensure that justice is served in a timely manner.
Exactly.
Okay, ready for another round in the ongoing battle between the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and COA.
Uh-oh. Round 2, let's go.
This time over, the SEC's attempts to use their income for employee benefits.
This case, SEC versus COA, highlights the importance of adhering to the letter of the law,
Okay.
especially when it comes to the use of public funds.
So the SEC wanted to give their employees some extra benefits.
Yes, they wanted to use a portion of their income for employee benefits,
Okay.
arguing that it fell under the category of maintenance and other operating expenses, or MOE.
MOA. Okay, what's that?
It's a very broad category that includes things like office supplies and travel expenses.
So they were trying to fit employee benefits into a category that doesn't really seem like it was meant for that?
That's what COA argued. COA disagreed, stating that MOE was not intended for employee benefits.
Right.
They said that the SEC was trying to circumvent the law
Yeah.
by broadening the interpretation of this category.
So back to the Supreme Court.
Back to the Supreme Court.
Did they side with the SEC this time?
They did not.
Okay.
The court sided with COA, emphasizing the importance of the plain meaning rule when interpreting laws.
Okay.
They basically said you can't twist the words of the law
Right.
to fit your own purpose.
So the SEC was getting a little too creative with their accountant.
Perhaps a little too creative.
If they thought these benefits were so important for their employees,
Yeah.
what other options did they have?
That's a great question.
Could they have, gone to Congress to get a specific allocation?
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when navigating complex legal and bureaucratic frameworks,
Right.
there are often multiple pathways to achieving a desired outcome.
Okay, let's meet a government employee who found herself in a really unfortunate situation. We're talking about stolen cash, a robbery, and an accountant caught in the crossfire.
This case, Victor Barroso versus COA, emphasizes the importance of due process, even in cases involving financial accountability.
What happened?
A BSU employee, Magabo,
Okay.
was tasked with delivering payroll cash,
Okay.
almost P600,000.
Okay.
She was walking back from the bank
Mm-hmm.
when she was robbed. A bag containing all that cash was stolen.
That's scary. Can you imagine being responsible for that much money?
It would be terrifying.
So what happened after the robbery?
COA, always vigilant about
Sure.
protecting government funds,
Yeah.
launched an investigation into the incident. Host,
So what happened after the robbery?
COA, always vigilant about protecting government funds, launched an investigation.
Of course.
They concluded that Magabo had been negligent in handling the cash
Okay.
and held her liable for the stolen amount.
Wait, but she was the victim of a crime.
I know, and it gets worse.
It gets worse.
COA also held her superiors, including Victor Barroso, liable
So they were punished for something they didn't even do.
for failing to provide adequate security measures.
What was their defense?
Barroso appealed COA's decision,
Okay.
arguing that he was denied due process.
So he wasn't given a chance to defend himself?
He claimed that he was never given a proper chance to defend himself or present evidence to prove that he wasn't negligent.
Did the Supreme Court agree?
They did. The court found that Barroso was added to the case late
Okay.
and wasn't given a chance to review crucial evidence,
What kind of evidence?
including an affidavit from a retired BSU accountant that suggested that security measures had been requested but denied.
Wow, so they were setting him up to fail.
The court nullified COA's decision, holding Barroso liable,
Okay.
highlighting the presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
So even in these cases involving financial accountability,
Yeah.
individuals still have rights.
Absolutely. This case emphasizes that the pursuit of recovering funds shouldn't come at the expense of fairness and due process.
Okay, now for a case that will make you think about plea bargains
Okay.
and double jeopardy.
It's People versus Edgar Majinkar Iabut,
Okay.
and it involves two men charged with drug offenses.
Okay, what happened?
This case highlights the importance of consent from all parties involved in plea agreements.
Okay.
So Majinkar and Laguna were initially charged with drug offenses
Mm-hmm.
and decided to plead guilty to a lesser offense,
Okay.
hoping for a lighter sentence.
Right, that's pretty common, right?
It is. It's a pretty common tactic in criminal cases to cut a deal and avoid a lengthy trial.
But there was a problem in this case.
The prosecution objected to the plea deal.
Why would they do that? wouldn't a guilty plea be a win for them?
The prosecution likely believed that they had a strong case
Okay.
for the original, more serious charges,
Right.
and they didn't want to settle for a lesser conviction.
So they wanted to go for the full penalty,
Yes,
even though it meant a longer trial.
even though it meant a longer, more complex trial.
But the trial court, despite the prosecution's objections, accepted the guilty pleas to the lesser offenses.
Right.
So the judge overruled the prosecution.
The prosecution appealed,
Okay.
arguing that accepting the plea deal without their consent would violate the principle of double jeopardy.
Just to clarify, double jeopardy means you can't be tried twice for the same crime, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
The Supreme Court agreed with the prosecution.
Really?
They ruled that accepting the plea deal without the prosecutor's consent would violate double jeopardy.
So they were saying if they let the defendants plead guilty to the lesser offense now, they couldn't later try them for the more serious original charges.
Exactly.
So the prosecution had to be on board with the plea deal.
It requires the agreement of all parties involved.
Okay.
Prosecution, the defense,
Right.
and the judge.
Okay. Let's meet Stuart Leonardo, a mayor who learned that you can't use government funds for personal shopping sprees.
Oh, dear.
This case, Stuart Leonardo versus People, is all about the misuse of public resources and the ethical responsibilities of public officials.
So what did he do?
Leonardo was the mayor of Quezon, Bukidnon,
Okay.
and he was authorized to purchase trucks and heavy equipment for the municipality.
Right.
But instead of sticking to his official duties, he decided to treat himself to some new toys.
What did he do?
He attended an auction
Okay.
and used the municipality's bid deposit P100,000 to bid on not only municipal equipment,
Oh,
but also some equipment for his own personal use.
that's a clear abuse of power.
Yeah.
You can't use government funds for personal gain.
To make matters worse, he initially registered all the equipment,
Yeah.
including his personal purchases, under the municipality's name.
Sounds like he was trying to cover his tracks.
He was.
But the ombudsman caught on.
Of course.
They filed a case against him
Okay.
for violating the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act.
Did Leonardo try to defend his actions?
He did.
What'd he say?
He argued that it was a simple mistake and that he had reimbursed the municipality for the bid deposit
Right.
before any charges were filed.
So, no harm, no foul.
But the Senegan Bayan,
Yeah.
the court that handles corruption cases,
Right.
didn't buy it.
They found him guilty?
They found him guilty
Wow.
and sentenced him to imprisonment.
He went to jail.
He also was perpetually disqualified from holding public office
Okay.
and ordered to reimburse the municipality
Wow.
for the cost of transporting the equipment.
A harsh but necessary reminder that abuse in public office has serious consequences.
The Supreme Court upheld the Senegan Bayan's decision,
Okay.
emphasizing that public officials are held to a higher standard of conduct.
For sure.
Even seemingly minor instances of corruption
Yeah.
can erode public trust
Absolutely.
and undermine the integrity of government.
It's a reminder that every peso of public funds is entrusted to officials for the benefit of the people,
Yes,
not for their own enrichment.
exactly. And this case prompts a question for you. How can we strengthen those accountability mechanisms,
Right.
ethical standards
Yeah.
for public officials to prevent even those small instances of corruption?
Absolutely. All right, well, that concludes our Philippine political law deep dive.
It's been a marathon.
It has. We covered a lot of ground: elections, corruption, due process, bureaucratic delays.
Woo.
It's been quite a journey.
What's the most important thing you'd want our listeners to take away from all these cases?
I think the key takeaway is that the pursuit of justice
Yes.
is an ongoing process, a
Yeah.
constant balancing act
Exactly.
between competing interests, principles, and priorities.
It's about holding individuals and institutions accountable while also ensuring fairness, transparency,
Right.
and protection of individual rights.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise
My pleasure.
and guiding us through these fascinating cases.
It was fun.
It was. Until our next deep dive, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep those legal minds sharp.
Couldn't have said it better myself.